Bernice Plumtree always seemed to fade into the background. At 16 years of age, she was of regular build, with straight brown hair reaching her collarbone that she typically fastened with a plain clip. She usually had on loose-fitting cardigans that hid her slender figure. Her simple silver spectacles rested on her face as she wandered the hallways of Oakhaven Academy with quiet purpose, holding her schoolbooks to her chest as protection against the world. What almost everyone didn't know was that Bernice was Headmaster Thornton's daughter. Her father had insisted on keeping their connection a secret to prevent anyone from thinking she received preferential treatment. Bernice had agreed, wishing to earn her place at the school based on her own work. She also hid a different secret. She had been studying Aikido since she was 11, achieving her brown belt just 5 months before. The issues started on a chilly Tuesday morning in November. Bernice was heading to her class when she saw 3 pupils blocking the path. Greg Blackwood, the group's supposed leader, stood tall at nearly 6'1", with large muscles and the self-assuredness that came from never facing any challenge. His dark brown hair was always perfectly combed, and his designer jacket indicated his position as a popular athlete. Standing next to him were his constant followers, Frank Rogers, a heavy-set young man with a nasty disposition acting as Greg's muscle, and Tiffany Wright, a girl whose stunning looks were only equaled by her spitefulness. "Well, look what we have here," Greg said as Bernice got closer, his tone full of insincere kindness. "If it isn't the school's biggest nerd." Bernice kept her gaze low and tried to walk past them, but Frank moved to the side, blocking her way. "Where do you think you're going so fast, Specs?" he scoffed, using the demeaning name they had given her. "I need to get to my science class," Bernice said softly, her voice barely audible. Tiffany giggled, a sound like ice cracking. "Did you all hear that? She actually talks. I was beginning to wonder if she was a mute." Bernice felt her face get hot with shame as more pupils began to gather, making a circle around the situation. She noticed the mixture of interest and thankfulness in their expressions, thankfulness that they weren't the targets. She had noticed that same look on her own face when she had watched others being teased. "Please, I don't want any problems," Bernice said, trying again to walk past them. She could smell the lingering aroma of burnt toast from the morning's breakfast as she tried to squeeze past. Greg grabbed her satchel and pulled it off her shoulder, causing her notebooks to fall on the floor. "Oops," he said with fake worry. "Looks like you had a little accident there, Brainiac." As Bernice knelt to pick up her scattered belongings, she felt the anger starting to build. The same anger her Aikido teacher had shown her how to manage and control. But she kept it down, remembering her father's words about being the bigger person. She couldn't retaliate, not here, not as the headmaster's daughter. It would only make things worse for everyone involved. The teasing continued throughout the first few weeks of classes. Greg and his friends seemed to especially enjoy bothering Bernice during lunchtime in the dining hall. They would accidentally run into her, making her spill her lunch, or they would sit near her and make loud comments about how she looked, her clothing, or her lack of friends. "Look at her, eating all alone again," Tiffany would say, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "It's really sad. Do you think anyone would notice if she just vanished one day?" Bernice would keep eating her meal, pretending not to hear, but inside she was taking note of every detail of their actions. Her Aikido training had taught her to be watchful, to see patterns and weaknesses in possible opponents. Greg was physically powerful, but overconfident, depending on his size and status to scare others. Frank was intense, but clumsy, the type who would show his hand before attacking. Tiffany was mean but afraid, the type to run at the first sign of real trouble. The teasing got worse during Bernice's second week at the school. She was walking near the art room when Greg showed up beside her, walking at the same speed. The sounds of the nearby band practicing filled the air. "You know, Bookworm, I've been thinking," he said casually. "Maybe you need some buddies. Someone to show you around here." Bernice kept walking, but she could feel her muscles tightening, her body automatically moving into a more balanced stance. "I'm okay, thank you." "Oh, but I insist," Greg said, and suddenly his hand was on her arm, his grip tight enough to stop her from moving. "In fact, I think you should come with us now." Before Bernice could reply, Frank appeared on her other side, and Tiffany blocked her path. They had clearly planned this, choosing a quieter area where there would be fewer people around. "We're going to have a little chat," Greg said, his friendly mask dropping to reveal something more frightening. "About your attitude problem." They led her toward a deserted classroom, and Bernice felt a wave of fear. This was different from their usual public teasing. This felt dangerous. But as they pushed her through the doorway, she reminded herself of her lessons. She had skills they didn't know about, abilities they couldn't imagine. Inside the classroom, Greg stood between Bernice and the doorway, while Frank and Tiffany stood on either side of her. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting shadows across the dusty floor. She could smell the faint odor of old paint and chalk dust. "Here's the deal, nerd," Greg said, his tone becoming harsher. "You've been really unappreciative lately. We've been trying to help you fit in, give you some attention, but you just ignore us. That's not very nice." "I don't want your attention," Bernice said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Greg's face grew dark. "See, that's exactly the attitude I'm talking about. You think you're better than us, don't you? With your perfect grades and your goody-two-shoes act." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Bernice replied truthfully. "I just want to be left alone." Tiffany stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Well, that's too bad, because we're not done with you yet. In fact, I think we're just getting started." Frank cracked his knuckles, a sound that echoed in the silent classroom. Maybe she needs a lesson in respect. Bernice felt her heart beat faster, but not from fear. It was the same feeling she got during practice, her body getting ready for action. She shifted her weight slightly, moving into a more ready position without making it obvious. "You know what your problem is," Greg continued, moving closer. "You're weak. You let people walk all over you because you don't have the courage to stand up for yourself. Well, guess what? That makes you the perfect target." As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed the front of Bernice's cardigan, pulling her toward him. It was a mistake, the first of many he would make in the next few minutes. The threads of the old wool cardigan snagged roughly against her skin. For weeks, Bernice had put up with their insults and their physical threats because she had to keep her identity a secret, protect her father's job, and avoid drawing attention to herself. But now they had gone too far. They had moved from public teasing to private assault, and that changed everything. Bernice's hand moved quickly, grabbing Greg's wrist and twisting it in a way it wasn't meant to move. The technique was called kotegaeshi in Aikido, a basic way to break someone's grip and take control of their arm. Greg's eyes widened with surprise and pain as Bernice put pressure on his wrist, making him kneel. "Let me go," he yelled, but Bernice's grip was like steel. "You first," she said calmly, and with a small adjustment of her hold, she made him release her cardigan. Frank reacted quickly, charging toward Bernice with his fists clenched. He was bigger and stronger than her, but he was also angry and reckless. Bernice stepped aside, using his momentum against him, and delivered a sharp palm strike to his chest. The blow stunned him, and he stumbled backward, gasping for air. Tiffany screamed and ran for the door, but Bernice was already moving. She released Greg's wrist and spun around, her legs sweeping out in a smooth arc that caught Tiffany behind the legs. The other girl fell hard, landing on her side with a cry of pain and shock. Greg was back on his feet now, his face red with anger and shame. "You little weirdo, I'm going to—" He didn't finish the sentence. Bernice's fist hit his jaw in a perfect punch, her whole body behind the blow. Greg staggered backward, his hands flying to his face, blood pouring from his lip. "You broke my lip!" he cried, his voice sounding high and childish. I did, Bernice said matter-of-factly, and I'll break more if you don't listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The three bullies stared at her in shock, as if they were seeing her for the first time. And in a way, they were. Gone was the quiet, shy girl they had been teasing for weeks. In her place stood someone confident, in control, and clearly dangerous. "My name is Bernice Plumtree," she said, her voice carrying a strength that made all three of them flinch. "And I think it's time you realized who you've really been messing with." Greg's eyes widened as the truth hit him. "Plumtree? You mean you're Headmaster Thornton's daughter?" Bernice confirmed. "And before you start thinking about running to tell someone what happened here, you should know that I have been keeping track of everything you've done to me for the past few weeks. Every insult, every physical threat, every time you've made me feel unsafe in what should be a safe place." Frank was still holding his chest, trying to catch his breath. "You can't prove anything," he gasped. Bernice reached into her satchel and pulled out her mobile phone. "Actually, I can. I've been recording audio of our conversations. I have dates, times, statements from witnesses, and photos of the aftermath of your attacks. Would you like to hear the recording from last Thursday when you threw my lunch in the trash?" The color drained from Tiffany's face. "You can't do this to us. We're well known. We're popular." "You're bullies," Bernice corrected, "and bullies are never as well known as they think they are." She walked over to the window and looked out at the school grounds below, where pupils were beginning to gather for the end of the day. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave me alone from now on, completely alone. You're not going to look at me, talk to me, or even think about me. And if I hear that you've targeted anyone else the way you've targeted me, I will make sure that every piece of evidence I have collected ends up in the right hands." Greg was still holding his lip, trying to stop the bleeding. "You think you're so tough now, but this isn't over. Just because your father is the headmaster doesn't mean—" Bernice turned from the window and looked at him with a look so cold it made him stop talking. "Actually, that's exactly what it means. But more than that, I want you to realize something about who I really am." She walked back to the center of the room, her movements smooth and controlled. "I've been studying Aikido since I was 11. That's years of learning how to handle danger, how to use an attacker's force against them, how to end a fight before it really begins. What you just saw was me holding back. A lot." She paused to let that sink in. "I didn't retaliate before because I was trying to be the better person. I was trying to handle this with dignity and respect. But you three decided that wasn't enough. You decided to make things worse. You decided to trap me in an empty classroom and threaten me with violence." Frank finally stood up straight, his face still pale. "We weren't going to hurt you. We were just trying to scare you." "Threats are a form of violence," Bernice replied, "and threatening someone with harm is assault, even if you don't act on it. I have every right to defend myself, and I have every right to make sure you face the consequences for your actions." Tiffany was crying now, mascara running down her face. "Please don't tell anyone. We're sorry. We'll leave you alone, we promise." Bernice looked at her for a long moment. "I want to believe you, Tiffany. I really do. But I've been watching you for weeks now. I've seen how you treat other pupils when you think no one is watching. I've seen you trip younger students in the hallway, spread stories about girls you don't like, and generally make life hard for anyone you think is different or weak." She turned to face all three of them. "This isn't just about me. This is about the culture of threats and cruelty that you've created in this school. It's about the many other pupils who have suffered because of your need to feel strong and important." Greg wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. "So what do you want from us? Money? An apology? What?" "I want you to change," Bernice said simply. "I want you to realize that your actions have consequences. I want you to think about the kind of people you've been and decide if that's really who you want to continue being." She picked up her satchel and put it over her shoulder. "But mostly, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that the quiet girl you thought was an easy target was actually someone who could have seriously hurt you if she had wanted to. I want you to remember that you never really know what someone else is capable of." As Bernice walked toward the door, Greg called out after her, "This doesn't change anything. People will still think you're a weirdo. You'll still be alone." Bernice stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. "Greg, I was never alone. I chose to be quiet. I chose to keep to myself. I chose to focus on my schoolwork and my training instead of playing games with people like you. But that was always my choice." She smiled, and there was something in that smile that made all three of them step back. "The difference is, now everyone will know that I had the power to end this anytime I wanted. They'll know that I let you think you were in control because I was trying to be kind. They'll know that when I finally decided to act, you three couldn't handle it." With that, she walked out of the classroom, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. The distant sounds of the school bell echoed in the hallway. News of the confrontation spread through the school like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone had heard some version of the events. The details were different. Some people said Bernice had beaten all three bullies unconscious. Others said she had used martial arts weapons. But the main point was the same. The quiet girl had turned out to be far more dangerous than anyone had thought. Greg, Frank, and Tiffany found themselves in a strange new situation. The other pupils looked at them differently now, not with the mix of fear and respect they had become used to, but with something more complicated. There was pity there, and embarrassment, and a kind of shared shame that came from realizing they had been supporting the wrong person all along. Bernice, meanwhile, found that her life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Pupils who had never spoken to her before began nodding politely when they saw her in the hallways. Teachers seemed to look at her with new interest. Even the janitor, Mr. Evans, gave her a quiet thumbs up when she walked past him in the dining hall. More importantly, she noticed that the general feeling of the school had changed. Greg and his group had been a source of fear and threats for so many pupils that their sudden downfall created a kind of power gap. Other pupils began standing up for themselves in small ways, sitting where they wanted to sit, speaking up in class, wearing clothing that showed their personalities instead of trying to fit in. A week after the incident, Bernice was eating lunch in the dining hall when a younger girl approached her table nervously. The aroma of the day's special chicken pot pie filled the air. "Excuse me," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Bernice Plumtree?" Bernice looked up from her book and nodded. "Yes, I am." "I'm Susan," the girl said, still standing awkwardly beside the table. "I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" Susan's eyes filled with tears. "Greg and Frank used to trap me in the bathrooms and take my money. They said if I told anyone, they would make my life even worse. But after what happened with you, they haven't bothered me at all. They won't even look at me." Bernice felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with anger or the adrenaline of combat. "I'm glad, Susan. No one deserves to be treated that way." "Could I maybe sit with you?" Susan asked hopefully. "I mean, if you don't mind, I know you usually eat alone." Bernice smiled and pointed to the empty seat across from her. "I'd like that very much." As Susan settled into her seat, Bernice realized that this was perhaps the most important result of her confrontation with the bullies. She had learned to stand up for herself, yes, but more than that, she had given other people permission to do the same. She had shown them that bullies weren't invincible, that they could be challenged and defeated. Over the next few weeks, Bernice's relationship with her father grew stronger as well. He had heard about the incident through official sources, of course, but Bernice had chosen to tell him the whole story herself. She had been worried about revealing her Aikido training, worried that he might be upset that she had kept it a secret for so long. Instead, Headmaster Thornton had listened to her story with growing pride and respect. "I'm sorry you felt like you had to handle this alone," he had told her. "And I'm proud of the way you handled it. Not just the physical part, but everything that led up to it. You tried to solve the problem without fighting first. You kept track of everything. You gave them chances to change. And when you finally did fight back, you used just enough force to protect yourself, nothing more." He had paused then, looking at her with new eyes. "I always knew you were strong, Bernice, but I didn't know how strong until now." As the school year went on, Bernice found herself settling into a new role within the school's social structure. She wasn't popular in the usual way. She still liked books more than parties, still kept her group of close friends small and carefully chosen. But she had earned something more valuable than popularity: respect. Pupils began coming to her for advice when they were having problems with bullies. Teachers began noticing her contributions in class. Even some of the athletes and well-known pupils began treating her as an equal instead of someone to be ignored. Greg, Frank, and Tiffany, meanwhile, struggled to find their place in the new order. Without their ability to scare and control others, they realized that they didn't have much else to offer. Greg's playing suffered as his confidence disappeared. Frank found himself increasingly isolated as other pupils realized he was all talk. Tiffany's attempts to keep her social status through gossip failed when people stopped caring about her opinions. The most surprising thing happened near the end of the school year when Greg approached Bernice after a particularly hard history test. "Hey," he said awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. Bernice looked up from her notes, her face neutral. "Greg, I wanted to talk to you about something," he continued, his voice lacking its usual pride. "About what happened between us." Bernice waited, not making it easier for him but not shutting him down. Greg took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. Really apologize. Not because I'm afraid of you or because I want something from you, but because I've been thinking about what you said that day, about the kind of person I was being." He paused, looking down at his shoes. "I didn't like what I saw when I really looked at myself. I didn't like the way I made other people feel. I didn't like the person I had become." Bernice studied his face, looking for signs of lies. What she saw instead was real regret and the kind of awareness that comes from real thinking. "I accept your apology," she said finally, "but you should know that apologizing to me is just the start. You hurt a lot of people, Greg. You made this school a scary place for pupils who were just trying to get through their day without being teased." Greg nodded. "I know. I've been trying to apologize to everyone I can remember hurting. It's taking a while." "That's good," Bernice said. "Real change takes time." As they got ready to leave, Greg hesitated. "Can I ask you something? That day in the classroom when you fought back, were you scared at all?" Bernice thought about the question. "Yes, I was scared. Not of you three, but of what I might do if I lost control. I was scared of becoming the kind of person who uses fighting as a first choice instead of a last one." "But you didn't lose control," Greg pointed out. "No, I didn't. And that's the difference between defending yourself and becoming a bully. When you defend yourself, you use just enough force to stop the threat. When you become a bully, you use force to make yourself feel strong." Greg nodded slowly. "I think I understand now." As he walked away, Bernice thought about how much had changed since that chilly Tuesday morning in November. She had learned that being quiet didn't mean being weak, that being kind didn't mean being helpless, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show control even when you have the ability to cause harm. She had also learned that standing up for yourself doesn't just change your own life. It can change the lives of everyone around you. By refusing to be a victim, she had inspired others to find their own strength. By defeating the bullies without becoming one herself, she had shown that it was possible to be both strong and kind. Most importantly, she had learned that true strength isn't about the ability to hurt others. It's about the wisdom to know when not to use that ability. and the courage to act when action is truly necessary. The distant drone of traffic on the nearby highway was a constant reminder of the world beyond the school walls. As Bernice walked out of Oakhaven Academy that day, she walked with a new kind of confidence. Not the proud swagger of someone who needed to prove their strength, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of and had chosen to use that knowledge wisely. She was no longer just the headmaster's daughter or the quiet girl with the books. She was Bernice Plumtree, and she had learned to stand up for herself and others while never losing sight of who she wanted to be. JavaScript const original text. Bullies mock the quiet girl. They had no idea she was the principal's daughter and a Krav Maga expert. Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of girl who preferred the shadows to the spotlight. At 17, she was average height with shoulder-length auburn hair that she usually kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore oversized sweaters that seemed to swallow her small frame. Her wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose as she navigated the hallways of Westfield High School with quiet determination, clutching her books close to her chest like a shield against the world. What none of her classmates knew was that Sarah was Principal Mitchell's daughter. Her father had insisted on keeping their relationship private to avoid any accusations of favoritism or special treatment. Sarah had agreed, wanting to earn her place at the school on her own merits. She also kept another secret hidden beneath her unassuming exterior. She had been training in Krav Maga since she was 12 years old, earning her black belt just 6 months ago. The trouble began on a grey Monday morning in October. Sarah was walking to her locker when she noticed 3 students blocking the hallway ahead. Tyler Brooks, the unofficial leader of the group, stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the kind of confident swagger that came from never being challenged. His sandy blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his letter jacket announced his status as the school's star quarterback. Flanking him were his constant companions, Marcus Webb, a stocky boy with a mean streak who served as Tyler's enforcer, and Jessica Kane, a girl whose beauty was matched only by her cruelty. "Well, well, look what we have here," Tyler said as Sarah approached, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "If it isn't the school's resident bookworm." Sarah kept her eyes down and tried to walk around them, but Marcus stepped sideways, blocking her path. "Where are you going in such a hurry, Four Eyes?" he sneered, using the nickname they had given her. "I need to get to my locker," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Did you guys hear that? She actually speaks. I was starting to think she was mute." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as other students began to gather, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. She recognized the mixture of curiosity and relief in their faces, relief that they weren't the ones being targeted. She had seen that same expression on her own face when she watched others being bullied. "Please, I don't want any trouble," Sarah said, trying once more to move past them. Tyler grabbed her backpack and yanked it off her shoulders, sending her books scattering across the hallway floor. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Looks like you had a little accident there, bookworm." As Sarah knelt to gather her scattered belongings, she felt the familiar fire building in her chest. The same fire her Krav Maga instructor had taught her to control and channel. But she pushed it down, remembering her father's words about the importance of taking the high road. She couldn't fight back, not here, not as the principal's daughter. It would only make things worse for both of them. The harassment continued throughout the first few weeks of school. Tyler and his crew seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting Sarah during lunch periods in the cafeteria. They would accidentally bump into her, causing her to spill food on herself. Or they would sit at the table next to hers and make loud comments about her appearance, her clothes, or her apparent lack of friends. "Look at her eating alone again," Jessica would say, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. It's actually kind of sad. Do you think anyone would notice if she just disappeared one day? Sarah would continue eating her sandwich, pretending not to hear, but inside she was cataloging every detail of their behavior. Her Krav Maga training had taught her to be observant, to notice patterns and weaknesses in potential opponents. Tyler was physically strong but arrogant, relying on his size and reputation to intimidate others. Marcus was aggressive but sloppy, the kind of person who would telegraph his moves. Jessica was cruel but cowardly, the type who would run at the first sign of real confrontation. The bullying escalated during Sarah's third week at the school. She was walking down the hallway near the gymnasium when Tyler appeared beside her, matching her pace. "You know, Bookworm, I've been thinking," he said conversationally. "Maybe you need some friends, someone to show you the ropes around here." Sarah kept walking, but she could feel her muscles tensing, her body automatically shifting into a more balanced stance. "I'm fine, thank you." "Oh, but I insist," Tyler said, and suddenly his hand was on her shoulder, his grip firm enough to stop her forward momentum. "In fact, I think you should come with us right now." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared on her other side, and Jessica blocked her path ahead. They had clearly planned this ambush, choosing a relatively empty hallway where there would be fewer witnesses. "We're going to have a little chat," Tyler said, his friendly facade dropping to reveal something much more menacing underneath. "About your attitude problem." They guided her toward an empty classroom, and Sarah felt a moment of real fear. This was different from their usual public humiliation tactics. This felt dangerous. But as they pushed her through the doorway, she reminded herself of her training. She had tools they didn't know about, skills they couldn't imagine. Inside the classroom, Tyler positioned himself between Sarah and the door, while Marcus and Jessica flanked her on either side. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "Here's the thing, Bookworm," Tyler said, his voice taking on a darker edge. "You've been really ungrateful lately. We've been trying to help you fit in, give you some attention, and you just ignore us. That's not very nice." "I don't want your attention," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Tyler's face darkened. "See, that's exactly the attitude I'm talking about. You think you're better than us, don't you? With your perfect grades and your holier-than-thou act." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Sarah replied honestly. "I just want to be left alone." Jessica stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Well, that's too bad, because we're not done with you yet. In fact, I think we're just getting started." Marcus cracked his knuckles, a sound that echoed in the empty classroom. Maybe she needs a lesson in respect. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear. It was the same controlled acceleration she experienced during training, her body preparing for combat. She shifted her weight slightly, moving into a more defensive position without making it obvious. "You know what your problem is?" Tyler continued, moving closer. "You're weak. You let people walk all over you because you don't have the spine to stand up for yourself. Well, guess what? That makes you the perfect target." As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed the front of Sarah's sweater, pulling her toward him. It was a mistake, the first of many he would make in the next few minutes. For weeks, Sarah had endured their taunts and their physical intimidation because she had to maintain her cover, protect her father's position, and avoid drawing attention to herself. But now, they had crossed a line. They had moved from public humiliation to private assault, and that changed everything. Sarah's hand moved with lightning speed, catching Tyler's wrist and twisting it in a direction it wasn't meant to go. The technique was called a pluck in Krav Maga, a simple but effective way to break someone's grip and gain control of their arm. Tyler's eyes went wide with shock and pain as Sarah applied pressure to his wrist, forcing him to his knees. "Let me go!" he gasped, but Sarah's grip was iron. "You first," she said calmly, and with a slight adjustment of her hold, she made him release her sweater. Marcus reacted first, charging towards Sarah with his fists raised. He was bigger and heavier than her, but he was also angry and careless. Sarah stepped to the side, using his momentum against him, and delivered a sharp elbow strike to his solar plexus. The blow knocked the wind out of him, and he doubled over, gasping for air. Jessica screamed and ran for the door, but Sarah was already moving. She released Tyler's wrist and spun around, her legs sweeping out in a perfect arc that caught Jessica behind the knees. The other girl went down hard, landing on her side with a cry of pain and surprise. Tyler was back on his feet now, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "You little freak, I'm going to—" He never got to finish the sentence. Sarah's fist connected with his jaw in a perfect straight punch, her whole body behind the blow. Tyler staggered backward, his hands flying to his face, blood streaming from his nose. "You broke my nose!" he whined, his voice now high and nasal. "I did," Sarah agreed matter-of-factly. "And I'll break a lot more if you don't listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." The three bullies stared at her in shock, as if they were seeing her for the first time, and in a way, they were. Gone was the quiet, submissive girl they had been tormenting for weeks. In her place stood someone confident, controlled, and clearly dangerous. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made all three of them flinch. "And I think it's time you learned who you've really been messing with." Tyler's eyes widened as the implications hit him. "Mitchell? You mean you're—" "Principal Mitchell's daughter," Sarah confirmed. "And before you start thinking about running to tell someone what happened here, you should know that I have been documenting every single thing you've done to me for the past 3 weeks. Every insult, every physical assault, every time you've made me feel unsafe in what should be a safe environment." Marcus was still clutching his stomach, trying to catch his breath. "You can't prove anything," he wheezed. Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. "Actually, I can. I've been recording audio of our encounters. I have timestamps, witness statements, and photographic evidence of the aftermath of your attacks. Would you like to hear the recording from last Tuesday when you poured chocolate milk on my jacket?" The blood drained from Jessica's face. "You can't do this to us. We're popular. We're important." "You're bullies," Sarah corrected, "and bullies are never as important as they think they are." She walked over to the window and looked out at the school courtyard below, where students were beginning to gather for dismissal. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave me alone from now on. Completely alone. You're not going to look at me, speak to me, or even think about me. And if I hear that you've targeted anyone else the way you've targeted me, I will make sure that every piece of evidence I have collected ends up in the right hands." Tyler was still holding his nose, trying to stop the bleeding. "You think you're so tough now, but this isn't over. Just because your daddy is the principal doesn't mean—" Sarah turned from the window and looked at him with an expression so cold it made him stop mid-sentence. "Actually, that's exactly what it means. But more than that, I want you to understand something about who I really am." She walked back to the center of the room, her movements fluid and controlled. "I've been training in Krav Maga since I was 12 years old. That's 5 years of learning how to neutralize threats, how to turn an attacker's strength against them, how to end a fight before it really begins. What you just experienced was me holding back. A lot." She paused to let that sink in. "I didn't fight back before because I was trying to be the bigger person. I was trying to handle this situation with dignity and restraint. But you three decided that wasn't enough. You decided to escalate. You decided to corner me in an empty classroom and threaten me with physical violence." Marcus finally straightened up, his face still pale. "We weren't going to really hurt you. We were just trying to scare you." "Intimidation is a form of violence," Sarah replied, "and threatening someone with physical harm is assault, even if you don't follow through. I have every right to defend myself, and I have every right to make sure you face consequences for your actions." Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Please don't tell anyone. We're sorry. We'll leave you alone, we promise." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "I want to believe you, Jessica.